Flight 782 was boarding under a crisp morning sky at JFK Airport. Passengers shuffled down the jet bridge, most too tired for small talk. Gate agents smiled with trained politeness, but tension buzzed beneath the surface. In first class, Roger Delmont adjusted his designer cufflinks and tapped impatiently on his phone. He wasn't just any passenger, he was the CEO of Del Air Technologies, and he made sure everyone knew it. "Do you know who I am?" he barked at a young flight attendant who asked him to stow his carry-on properly. She flinched, forcing a smile, and obeyed. Roger rolled his eyes. People these days. A few minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Elijah Brooks stepped out to greet the front cabin. He was tall, composed, and carried the kind of calm that came from decades in the sky. His crisp uniform and golden wings gleamed in the soft cabin lights. "Good morning, folks. I'm Captain Brooks, and I'll be flying you to Los Angeles today," he announced with a warm smile. His voice was steady, welcoming, but Roger's eyes narrowed. He blinked hard, leaned forward in his seat, and whispered under his breath, "No way!" He stood up suddenly and pointed. "Wait, he's the pilot?" The entire front cabin turned. "Is there a problem, sir?" asked the head flight attendant, her voice cautious. Roger's face twisted with visible discomfort. This isn't safe. He doesn't look like a pilot. He looks like..." He didn't finish his sentence, but the meaning was loud enough. Captain Brooks didn't flinch. He gave a polite nod. "I assure you, sir, I've logged over 12,000 hours. You're in safe hands." Roger stepped into the aisle. No, I don't feel safe. This is hijack level stuff. I want to speak to someone in charge. Now!" Gasps spread like wildfire through the cabin. The word hijack echoed. A mother clutched her child. A man dropped his coffee. Phones came out, cameras rolling. And Captain Brooks? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. But the way he responded next made the entire plane freeze. Captain Brooks took a single step forward, his eyes locked on Roger's, calm as ever. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence hang, tense, uncomfortable, charged. "Sir," Brooks finally said, voice even and deliberate, "you just used a word that can ground this entire flight, evacuate this aircraft, and trigger a federal investigation. Are you sure that's what you meant?" Roger scoffed, clearly flustered. I was just expressing concern. I didn't mean it literally, but look at you." The cabin went dead silent. All eyes were on the CEO now. A man in economy leaned into the aisle. "Did he just say, 'look at you'?" Brooks didn't flinch. "Sir, I've flown heads of state, celebrities, and even military evac missions. But I've never had a passenger accuse me of hijacking based on how I look." Roger's face flushed red. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. "I will now step into the cockpit," Brooks said, turning slightly. "But before I do, let me be very clear. If any passenger feels unsafe because of my race, they're free to disembark and take another flight." That hit like a thunderclap. The mother holding her child stood. "Captain, we're proud to fly with you." A ripple of agreement followed. A teenager clapped. Then a couple more. Within seconds, first class and coach alike were applauding. Roger was frozen in place, lips pursed in fury, alone in his outrage. The head flight attendant stepped up beside Brooks. "Captain, TSA protocol requires that we report the use of the word hijack, even in false alarm. Shall I proceed?" Brooks nodded once. "Yes, let's follow every rule to the letter." Roger blurted, "Wait, no! I didn't mean to cause trouble. This is a misunderstanding." Brooks turned back, his voice softer now. "Words have consequences, Mr. Delmont, especially when they're rooted in fear instead of facts." As the flight crew moved swiftly to inform airport security, the rest of the plane sat in the stunned silence, watching how dignity could disarm even the loudest form of hate. Roger sank into his seat, the smug confidence that once lit his face now drained completely. Sweat beaded along his hairline. A few rows behind him, passengers murmured. Someone whispered, "Serves him right." Another said, "About time someone stood up to people like that." Captain Brooks returned to the cockpit without another word, his back straight, his calm unshaken. Inside, his co-pilot, Jenna Torres, looked up with concern. You okay, Cap? He gave her a half smile. I've been called worse at 30,000 feet. Let's just run pre-check. Jenna hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, that was one of the most composed things I've ever seen. Back in the cabin, two TSA agents arrived within minutes. The head flight attendant briefed them quickly and pointed toward Roger, who now sat stiffly, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. One of the agents knelt beside him. Sir, we need to speak with you. Outside the aircraft. I'm the victim here, Roger snapped, flailing slightly. This is reverse racism. Sir, please cooperate, the agent repeated, calm but firm. Passengers watched with a mix of shock and satisfaction as Roger was escorted down the aisle. His expensive shoes clicked awkwardly against the floor, a man once used to being followed now being removed instead. Someone in coach muttered, Karma flies first class today. When the cabin door sealed again, there was a strange collective exhale. The tension seemed to lift. The flight attendant stepped forward with a mic in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Captain Brooks and First Officer Torres will now prepare for departure. Thank you for your patience. A quiet round of applause broke out again, this time not just for the captain, but for a sense of justice being restored. In the cockpit, Brooks flipped the final switches. Let's take her up, Jenna. Roger that, Captain, she said, a grin sneaking onto her face. As the engines roared to life, the runway lights ahead shimmered in the morning sun. But little did they know, the flight had only just begun, and so had the real story. 30 minutes into the flight, cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet, peace had mostly returned to the cabin. Passengers sipped their drinks, headphones on, some still exchanging whispers about what had happened at the gate. But in the cockpit, a different kind of quiet hung between Captain Brooks and Jenna. You ever think, Jenna finally said, how many times people like him have gotten away with it just because nobody wanted to make noise? Brooks gave a slow nod. Yeah, most of the time we let it slide. Keep the peace. But sometimes silence feels heavier than speaking up. Jenna glanced over. I'm glad you didn't stay silent today. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon. Suddenly, a soft chime interrupted the moment. The lead flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom. Captain, I'm sorry to bother you, but a passenger in 2A says he needs to speak with you personally. He says it's urgent. Brooks raised an eyebrow. 2A? That's right where Delmont was sitting. Jenna frowned. Did they reassign his seat? Brooks toggled the intercom. What's the passenger's name? A pause, then. He didn't give one. Just said, tell the captain he'll know who I am. Jenna looked over, tense now. Is this a joke? Brooks didn't answer immediately. He stood slowly, unbuckling his harness. I'll go check. Want me to call ahead? No. Let's not panic anyone. Stay on comms. As he stepped out of the cockpit and approached first class, heads turned. A man in 2A stood up slowly. He was tall, white-haired, wearing a dark business suit, but it wasn't Roger Delmont. Captain Brooks, the man said quietly, you don't know me, but I've been watching everything since before we boarded. Brooks paused. And who are you exactly? The man reached into his jacket, not fast, but deliberately, and pulled out a badge. U.S. Department of Transportation, Special Investigator Mason Reed. You just passed a hidden protocol test for flight discrimination escalation, and your response? He paused. It's about to change things at a national level. Captain Brooks stared at the badge, heart thudding once, but his face stayed calm. A test, he repeated, voice measured. You mean that whole scene was staged? Mason Reed gave a small nod. Partially. The man you knew as Roger Delmont is actually a federal contractor. We've been running covert discrimination response evaluations across multiple airlines. Your flight was selected due to recent complaints about implicit bias at high altitudes. Brooks didn't say anything at first. He folded his arms, processing. We don't warn flight crews, Mason continued, because real bias doesn't announce itself. It walks onto a plane like any other passenger. And we need to know how captains respond when authority, safety, and personal dignity are tested at the same time. Brooks exhaled. So that word, hijack, was part of the script? It was the trigger, Mason said. Our goal was to see if you'd stay professional under pressure or lose control. Most people freeze. Some argue. But what you did, he shook his head, almost impressed. You didn't just diffuse the situation. You exposed a culture. Passengers nearby were still unaware, but a few were peeking over their seats now, sensing the unusual conversation. I didn't do it for a camera, Brooks said finally. I did it because I've lived that moment in smaller ways 100 times. I'm just tired of pretending it's okay. Mason looked him in the eye. Which is why the DOT is preparing to issue a new training program for all commercial airlines. Modeled around your response today, they want to fly you to DC after this trip. There's a press briefing. You'll be named. Brooks blinked. You're serious? Dead serious. Today, Captain, you didn't just fly a plane. You flew past every ceiling they tried to put above you. From the back of first class, a little girl clapped, just once. Then her mother joined in. Within seconds, applause rippled again through the cabin. This time it wasn't polite or awkward, it was real. Captain Brooks returned to the cockpit, but something had shifted. He wasn't just piloting a plane now, he was carrying a message. One he never asked to carry, but had borne with quiet strength his whole career. Jenna looked up as he settled back in. You okay? She asked softly. He gave a slow nod. Yeah, just didn't realize this flight was going to rewrite policy. Jenna blinked. Wait, what? I'll explain after landing, he said with a faint smile. For now, let's bring this bird home. The rest of the flight was smooth. Passengers were calmer, kinder. The cabin crew exchanged subtle nods and glances with Brooks when they passed the cockpit door, as if seeing him for the first time, not just as a captain, but as something more. When Flight 782 touched down in Los Angeles, the landing was textbook perfect. As the wheels kissed the runway, the cabin erupted in applause once more, not for the landing, but for the man flying it. As passengers disembarked, many stopped at the cockpit door. Thank you, Captain, said an elderly woman, tears in her eyes. My grandson wants to be a pilot. He's black. Today you gave him someone to believe in. A teenager handed him a note folded into a paper airplane. On it, in shaky handwriting, you made me feel safe today. Even the gate agents on the ground had heard. A few stood aside, letting the moment pass with respectful silence. Then, near the jet bridge exit, Mason Reed was waiting again. This time not as an observer, but as an ally. We'll be in touch, Mason said, shaking his hand. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day, Captain. You earned it. Brooks stepped out into the warm California sun, his captain's hat tucked under one arm, the wind gently brushing his sleeves. He took a breath, the kind that fills the lungs and soul. He had flown thousands of hours, seen storms above clouds, and engines pushed to limits. But nothing compared to this flight, this moment, because sometimes the greatest turbulence isn't in the sky. It's in people's hearts, and the smoothest landings are the ones where truth finally touches down.